Welcome, everyone. Today, we delve into a poignant story of love, betrayal, and self-discovery. The calm before the storm. From the outside, our life seemed like a perfect picture of happiness and peace. David and I had been married for over 10 years. During those years, we had built a solid family together with two adorable children. Our eldest, Sophia, was 8 years old, a smart and creative little girl who loved drawing and telling stories about her imaginary characters. Our younger child, Jacob, was 5, a lively but sweet boy with a smile that no one could resist. David was a model husband, a successful businessman, and a loving father. He always made sure we had everything we needed, from financial security to weekend getaways at luxurious places. To our friends and neighbors, we were the ideal couple, a picture of success and happiness. Anyone who met us would praise David for his dedication to his family and the achievements he had in his career. I felt lucky to have him in my life. Our house was in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was a 2-story home with a spacious yard where the kids could run and play freely. I had spent a lot of time decorating every corner, from the soft sofas in the living room to the gentle colors of the bedrooms, which I believed would give everyone a warm feeling. Our small kitchen was where we gathered for meals with cheerful conversations after long days. Life seemed perfect, but even the most beautiful pictures can have cracks that are hard to see. David's work was becoming increasingly demanding. Meetings dragged on and business trips became more frequent. He often left early and came home late, sometimes even on weekends. At first, I didn't think much of it because I knew how important his job was, and I wanted to support him in his career. We had long agreed that he would work hard to secure our family's future, while I would manage the house, take care of the children, and ensure everything was running smoothly. However, what worried me more was that David seemed to spend less and less time with me. Our intimate conversations started to dwindle, replaced by shallow small talk and hurried hugs before he rushed out the door. Even though we still had dinner together, when possible, the closeness I used to feel from him seemed to fade. Something between us had changed, but I didn't know when it started. One day, I decided to hire a housekeeper to help with the chores. With my teaching job and taking care of the kids, I was starting to feel overwhelmed. A friend recommended a domestic helper service company. They had many options, and after interviewing a few candidates, I chose Anna. She was a young woman, about 25, from a rural area with a gentle appearance and a soft smile. Anna worked hard and diligently, easing much of the pressure I felt from housework and looking after the children. At first, Anna only did simple tasks, cleaning, laundry, and light cooking. I was very satisfied with her work, and she quickly adapted to the rhythm of our family. The kids adored Anna, often playing with her while I was busy with work. Gradually, I let her take on more responsibilities, even picking up the kids from school when I had to work late. David seemed pleased to have Anna around the house as well. He complimented her on how she took care of the house, and even joked that I was lucky to have found such a good helper. His compliments made me feel happy and reassured until I noticed he started paying more attention to her than seemed normal. There were times when I felt like an outsider, standing quietly as they chatted and laughed in the kitchen. I began to sense that something wasn't right, but I couldn't admit it to myself. Maybe it was just baseless imagination, I told myself, but the unease in my heart kept growing. David's late nights, the phone calls he quickly ended when I entered the room, all of these made me question what was happening between him and Anna. I didn't want to become a wife who doubted her husband without reason, but my instincts couldn't be ignored. For a long time, I wrestled with whether I was imagining everything, or if something truly was wrong in our home. The first signs. As time passed, I noticed small but significant changes in David's attitude and behavior. Initially, I told myself it was just the stress of work and the pressures he faced with the major project he was managing. However, the unusual signs became harder to ignore, and I began to feel a creeping sense of anxiety in my mind. One of the first things I noticed was how he changed in taking care of himself. David had always been attentive to his appearance, but lately, he seemed to spend more time in front of the mirror, adjusting his clothes and hair before leaving the house. At first, I teased him, saying, "Who are you trying to impress by looking so handsome every day?" David just smiled and winked at me, but he didn't give a clear answer. I didn't suspect anything at the time, but there was an odd feeling in my heart. Then there were the evenings when David came home later than usual. In the past, if he had to stay at the office or meet with clients, he would always call or text me beforehand. But now, those calls seemed to dwindle, replaced by vague excuses like, "I have an urgent meeting" or "work unexpectedly ran long." Some nights, he came home so late that by the time he walked in the door, the kids were already fast asleep, and I sat waiting in the living room with a mix of worrying and disappointment. What confused me the most was his attitude at home. David no longer talked to me as he used to. Our conversations became brief and superficial. He stopped sharing details about work or future plans, and sometimes when I asked, he would respond curtly, as if wanting to end the conversation quickly. Though he maintained a normal exterior, I sensed an invisible distance growing between us. Then one day, I accidentally saw something that left me unsettled. It was a late afternoon when I was tidying up David's home office. On the desk, I found a shirt he had worn the night before when he came home late. What caught my attention was not the shirt itself, but a strange scent of perfume lingering on it, a fragrance I didn't recognize. It was a sweet, alluring scent, but foreign to me. I tried to reassure myself that it could be from a work-related encounter, or that he might have accidentally picked it up somewhere. Yet the seeds of doubt began to sprout, even as I tried to push them away. Furthermore, I started paying attention to David's phone. He had never been secretive with me. In the past, his phone was always in plain sight, and sometimes we would even browse through messages or notifications from friends together. But recently, he kept his phone close and always turned the screen down whenever he received a text. Several times, I noticed that when I walked into the room, he quickly turned off the phone screen as if he didn't want me to see something. Once, I joked, "Do you have a secret from me?" David laughed it off, saying he was just reading the news or work emails, nothing to worry about. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. My suspicions deepened when I observed David and Anna, the housekeeper, having interactions that seemed more intimate than usual. At first, I hadn't paid much attention. Anna was a young girl, diligent and seemingly shy. She always kept her distance from us, focusing solely on her work. However, recently, I noticed that David and Anna seemed to share conversations whose content was unclear to me. One time when I walked into the kitchen, I saw them standing close together, laughing about something. Upon seeing me, both suddenly fell silent and David quickly changed the subject. Although it was just a fleeting moment, it was enough to stir doubts in my mind. One day, when I returned home earlier than expected after work, I found Anna cleaning the living room while David sat on the couch watching her. They looked perfectly ordinary, but David's gaze at Anna made me uneasy. It was not the look of a boss toward an employee. It was the gaze of a man captivated by another woman's presence. I felt a sharp pain in my chest but couldn't utter a word. I just stood there silently observing, trying to stay calm. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside David, listening to his steady breathing while my mind was a whirlwind of unanswered questions. Was I imagining things? Maybe I was just tired and more sensitive than usual. But deep down, I knew something had changed. The relationship between David and me was no longer the same, and I couldn't ignore the increasingly clear signs. I decided not to rush to conclusions, but that feeling of unease couldn't be extinguished. I began to pay closer attention to everything around me, from David's glances and gestures to Anna's every word and action. My suspicion grew stronger, and I knew that sooner or later, I would have to confront the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Facing the truth. I tried to ignore the signs, reassuring myself that maybe I was just being overly sensitive. But deep down, I knew that things were no longer the same. The feeling of unease haunted me, increasingly weighing on my mind. Everything seemed too clear to ignore. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I decided I needed to do something. I could no longer live in the shadow of doubt and invisible fear. It was a fall night with a gray sky heavy with clouds outside. The house was eerily quiet, with only the ticking clock on the wall and the soft whistling of the wind through the window. David had finished showering and was lying on the bed, curled up with his phone. I sat down beside him, feeling the warmth of my husband, but sensing an unbridgeable distance. I decided to start the conversation. "David," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "we need to talk." He looked up from his phone, his eyes flashing with surprise. "What's wrong?" he asked, still maintaining his usual composure. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. "There's something between you and Anna, isn't there?" My question seemed to freeze David. He stared at me in silence for a few seconds, as if trying to find the right words. But in his eyes, I could see confusion mixed with a hint of fear. At that moment, the unease within me had become an obvious reality. "What are you talking about?" David tried to laugh lightly, but his smile looked forced. "There's nothing between me and Anna. She's just a housekeeper. You're overthinking this." I had prepared for this denial. Deep down, I knew he wouldn't easily confess. But I didn't want to dodge the issue any longer. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I opened my phone and quietly showed David what I had discovered one evening before. It was a text message I had accidentally seen when he left his phone on the table, and I couldn't help but glance at it. A message from Anna, simply saying, "I'm so glad to have seen you today. I hope we'll have more time together." David stared at the screen, and I could see panic rising in his eyes. Suddenly, he could no longer hide. The perfect facade he had maintained seemed to shatter before me. I had seen the signs, but now the truth was clearer than ever. "What is this, David?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of pain and anger. "Can you explain this message?" David remained silent, his face filled with confusion. A part of me still hoped he would offer some explanation, a reasonable reason to ease his pain. But his silence told me there was no excuse. The truth was too clear. Finally, David sighed as if releasing a heavy burden. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice hoarse from tension. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I really didn't. I don't even know how this got out of hand." I felt as if someone was squeezing my heart. I thought I had prepared for this moment, but the painful truth was more than I had expected. I stared at David, unable to believe what I had just heard. "How did it get out of hand?" I repeated, my voice choked. "What do you mean? How long have you and Anna been seeing each other?" David looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "Not long," he said quietly, "just a few months." "A few months," I shouted, losing my composure. "You've been cheating on me for months, and you dare say not long? Do you even know how much that hurts me?" David looked up, his eyes filled with regret but also mixed with defensiveness. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he tried to explain. "Anna. She's a good person, but I didn't intend to leave you or the kids. I just got caught up in it. I promise, I'll end it immediately. I love you. I love the K." At that moment, I could no longer contain my anger and pain. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I couldn't stop myself from crying. David's words felt like salt in an open wound. "If you love me, how could you do this, to me, to our family?" I asked, each word laced with bitterness. David didn't know how to respond. He sat there silent, while I cried. We had gone through so much together, from the early struggles when we first started out, to the joyful moments welcoming Sophia and Jacob into our lives. I had trusted him, believing we would overcome everything together. But now this betrayal has shattered it all. After a long while, when I had finally stopped crying, I took a deep breath and said, "Do you know what hurts me the most? It's not the affair, it's that you deceived me for so long. I had the right to know the truth, David, and you took that away from me." David bowed his head, clearly having no justification for his actions. "I know," he said quietly. "I was wrong, and I'll do everything I can to make it right. Can you forgive me?" David's apology sounded like a plea, but I didn't know if I could forgive him. I needed time, and I wasn't sure if time could heal the wounds he had caused. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "I need time to think. And until I decide, don't expect me to pretend everything is normal." David fell silent, nodding. We sat there in the dark room, amidst a sea of chaotic emotions and pain. I didn't know what our future held, but one thing was certain: my life would never be the same again. Inner struggle. After David confessed to his relationship with Anna, I fell into a strange state that I had never experienced before. The pain of betrayal was overwhelming, but what hurt more were the mixed emotions that constantly surged within me. I knew I needed time to think, But during this time, I faced the most intense inner struggle of my life. The days that followed felt like a never-ending nightmare. Each morning I woke up, I felt like I was no longer myself. The home that I once considered a safe and warm place now felt cold and foreign. I looked at David, but I could no longer recognize the man I had loved and trusted for so many years. The memories of our love, of the happy family we had built together, were now shrouded in the dark shadow of betrayal. In my mind, thoughts swirled relentlessly. At times, I recalled the sweet moments we had shared. The evenings spent walking along the beach, the vows we exchanged on our wedding day, and the joyful moments when we welcomed Sophia and Jacob into our lives. I wondered how a man could betray after all that. How could he sacrifice everything for a fleeting moment of weakness? But there were also moments when I felt anger rising, not only towards David but also towards myself. I was angry for allowing things to happen without realizing it sooner. I blamed myself for trusting him too much, for not noticing the warning signs earlier. I questioned whether I had done something wrong, whether it was because I was no longer attractive in his eyes, or if our family life had become too mundane and boring for him. Those questions gnawed at me, preventing me from finding peace. There were nights when David had gone to sleep, and I lay restless in the living room, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I should do next. A part of me wanted to forgive him, to keep this family from falling apart. I thought of the kids, of Sophia and Jacob, who were still too young to understand what was happening. If they knew their parents were no longer happy, that our marriage was on the brink of collapse, how would they suffer? That thought made my heart ache, and many times I told myself that for the kids' sake, I should forgive and continue living with David. But on the other hand, I knew that forgiveness would not be easy. How could I look at David without thinking of what he had done? How could I forget the image of him and Anna, every time they spoke to each other, every time I saw the strange look in his eyes when he looked at her? I knew that if I chose to forgive, I would have to live with those haunting memories, and whether I was strong enough to overcome them was uncertain. Forgiveness wasn't just an act of reason, it was a battle with my emotions and my own self-esteem. One time, I sat by the living room window, looking outside. The rain fell softly, each drop hitting the ground like the sound of my heart breaking. I wondered how many women had experienced this pain, whether they had forgiven or chosen a different path. I could never know the exact answer, but I knew that whichever path I chose would be fraught with challenges. If I chose to forgive, I would have to mend the broken pieces of my heart and try to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. If I chose to part ways, I would have to face loneliness, the destruction of my family, and especially the pain my children would have to endure. In the days that followed, I began to spend more time on myself. I took walks in the park, where I could immerse myself in nature and think. I met with a few close friends, who had been there for me since the early days of this marriage. They didn't judge me but listened and supported me. They told me that I didn't have to make a decision immediately, that I had the right to feel everything and didn't have to act under anyone's pressure. That helped me feel a little relieved, even though the pain still weighed heavily on me. One afternoon, while I was sitting in the living room, David walked in, looking weary and remorseful. "Honey," he began softly, "I know I've hurt you deeply. I don't know if I can fix this, but I want you to know that I truly regret it. I love you and the kids, and I'll do everything to make amends for my mistakes." David's words confused me even more. I knew he was remorseful, but was that remorse enough to heal what had been broken? I looked into his eyes, the eyes I once loved and trusted, now feeling so foreign. I couldn't deny that, despite his betrayal, a part of me still loved him. But was that love strong enough to overcome the pain? On those long, restless nights, I repeatedly asked myself to forgive or not to forgive, to continue or to let go. Each choice carried its own consequences, and I knew there was no easy answer. But one thing I was certain of, whatever decision I made had to come from my own courage and self-esteem. I couldn't let the emotions of others, whether it was David or the kids, dictate my path. This inner struggle was not just about David and Anna, it was about myself. This was the time I had to confront my deepest values and desires. What kind of life did I want? Could I live with this pain, or did I need to walk away to seek freedom and peace? Those questions would not be easily answered, but I knew that only by facing and understanding myself could I make the right decision. Facing the truth and making a decision. After many days lost in thought and inner struggle, I knew I could not delay any longer. I had to face the truth and make a final decision. This was not just about our marriage. It was also about my own future, about the family I had tried to build over the years. I could not continue living in this state of uncertainty. I needed to act, no matter how painful the outcome might be. One Sunday morning, with the fresh air outside, I decided to have a serious and honest conversation with David. Over the past few days, despite his attempts to make amends, an invisible distance always lingered between us. David has shown remorse and done everything he could to prove that he wanted to reconcile, but my heart still couldn't decide whether I could forgive him and move on together. Sophia and Jacob were at their grandparents' house for the weekend, giving us time to think and talk without worrying about the kids overhearing. When the children were gone, the house suddenly felt strangely silent. I sensed that the atmosphere was heavier as the truth was about to be confronted. David sat on the couch in the living room, his face tense and worried. I knew he had realized today would be a decisive day. I walked into the room, sat down across from him, and felt my heart racing with each passing second. "David," I began, trying to stay calm. "We've been through a lot in the past few weeks. I've thought a lot, and today I want us to face the truth together." David looked at me, his eyes filled with anxiety. "I understand," he said softly. "I just want you to know that I regret what happened. I was wrong, and I will do everything to make it right. You and the kids mean everything to me, and I will never let this happen again." I took a deep breath. I knew David's words came from sincerity, but I also realized that apologies and promises were not enough to erase the wounds inside me. "I believe you regret it," I said, "but what I need now is not just an apology. I need time to find myself again, to understand if I can get through this. We had a family, we made beautiful memories, but what you did ... has changed everything." David lowered his head, saying nothing. He knew that any excuses at this point would be meaningless. I could feel his internal struggle, which mirrored my own over the past weeks. However, I had made a decision for myself. "David," I said, my voice gentle yet firm, "I can't continue like this. I've thought a lot, and I realize I need space to face everything on my own. We should take a break from each other for a while." David looked up, his expression momentarily stunned. "Do you want to break up?" he asked, his voice cracking. I shook my head. "Not an immediate breakup. I think we need time to think. We need distance to confront these feelings ourselves, to see if we can reconcile. Both of us need space to reevaluate this relationship." David sat silently, clearly not expecting this decision. I could see confusion and worrying reflected in his eyes. But I also knew this was the best thing for both of us. Without a temporary separation, I wouldn't know if I could truly forgive him, or if I was simply forcing myself to accept the reality. "I understand," David said softly, his voice low. "I will respect your decision, but you know I won't give up. I will try, and I hope we will have a chance to start over." I didn't respond. Part of me wanted to believe that, but another part knew that not everything could easily go back to the way it was. We had been through a tremendous storm, and whether there was anything left to mend afterward, I couldn't be sure. In the following time, we officially took a break. I moved in with my mother for a while, so the kids could still be close to both families. David stayed in our house, which I had once thought of as a home, but now it was just a painful memory. The distance between us gave me time to calm down and reflect on everything. In the weeks that followed, I focused on taking care of myself and reconnecting with the small joys I had overlooked. I joined a yoga class, often went for walks in the park, and read the books I had always wanted to but never had the time for. I gradually found myself again, the woman who had once been strong and passionate before being swept away by the whirlwind of marriage and family. David occasionally called, inquiring about the kids and expressing his desire to meet and talk. He didn't pressure me, but I knew he always hoped I would return, that we could reconcile. But I also knew that everything had changed. I needed time to consider everything carefully, to make a decision not just based on emotions, but also thinking about my own future and the children's. One afternoon, while I was sitting in a familiar cafe, a place I often visited whenever I needed a quiet space, I realized I was ready to make my final decision. After so many days of reflection, Facing the pain and desires for happiness, I understood that life could not rely solely on beautiful memories of the past. Life is about what we want to build for the present and future. I decided to meet David one last time. We met in a quiet cafe, not far from our home. He looked the same as always, but in his eyes I could see worrying and anticipation. "David," I said as we sat down, "I've thought a lot, and today I want to clearly tell you my decision." He sat up straight, clearly preparing himself for what was coming. "I've realized that we cannot go back to how things were before. I need to move on, to find happiness for myself, and I believe we cannot reconcile anymore. I have made my decision. We should get a divorce." David was silent for a long moment, his eyes filled with pain. I knew this was not what he wanted, but I also knew it was the right decision for both of us. After what had happened, we could not go back, and trying to continue would only hurt both of us further. Finally, David sighed and nodded. "If that's what you want, I will accept it," he said, his voice calm. "I just hope you find happiness, even if it's not with me." I smiled subtly, knowing that both of us had grown after the storm. We had loved each other, shared beautiful moments, but now we had to accept that life has unavoidable changes. I stood up, and for the first time in a long while, I felt light. I had faced the pain, made my decision, and now I could move on. Consequences and future. After deciding to get a divorce, my life turned a new page. Everything unfolded slowly, and with difficulty, as if I were learning to walk again after a painful fall. What happened between David and me left a deep scar in my heart, and I knew it wouldn't disappear easily. However, the important thing was that I was ready to face the consequences of the choice I had made. Breaking up and legal consequences. The divorce proceedings between David and me took place in a calm yet tense atmosphere. Although we had agreed not to contest major issues regarding property or child custody, the process still brought with it sadness and quiet conflicts. Sophia and Jacob were our biggest concern. Both were too young to understand everything, but I knew they sensed the changes in our family. David and I had agreed to share custody, trying to ensure that the children still felt love from both their father and mother, even though we no longer lived under the same roof. The day I signed the divorce papers, I felt as if I had officially let go of the past. Part of me felt relieved, but there was also pain. Although I knew this decision was right, getting divorced brought an unavoidable sense of loss. It wasn't just losing a spouse, it was also losing the hope of a perfect family, a future I had once imagined. David, though heartbroken, accepted my decision. He had tried to change, tried to make amends, but I knew that mending our relationship was impossible. Each time we met to discuss the children, David's eyes were always filled with regret. But I no longer held resentment toward him. We had both grown from each other's mistakes, and now it was time for each of us to find our own path. Impact on the children. Sophia and Jacob, despite their young age, noticed the differences in their lives. Initially, they asked me why their father wasn't home anymore, why we no longer sat down to eat together. Their innocent questions broke my heart, but I did my best to explain things in the simplest way possible. I didn't want them to feel abandoned or that they lack love from their parents. "Mom and Dad still love you very much," I often told them. "But now we need to live separately for a while." The children seemed to accept that, but I knew there were still many things they couldn't comprehend. The major changes in a child's life could leave psychological scars that were hard to measure. David and I tried to ensure they could maintain as normal a life as possible. David would take Sophia and Jacob to his house on weekends, while I tried to create fun activities when they were with me. Still, I worried about their future, wondering if this breakup would leave a lasting mark. On nights when the kids were sound asleep, I sat by their beds, gazing at their innocent faces, questioning whether I had made the right choice. I knew that a child's happiness shouldn't be tethered to an unhappy marriage. But I couldn't help but feel guilty thinking about them growing up without their parents together. It was a constant worrying in my mind, but I believed that the love and care from both David and me would help them through. moving forward and rediscovering myself. After the divorce, I realized that one of the most important things I needed to do was to rediscover myself. For many years, I had devoted all my time and energy to my family, my marriage, and my children, forgetting about my true self, the passionate, strong, and vibrant woman I once was. In the first few months after the divorce, I focused on self-care. I began to revisit the things I once loved but had abandoned. I enrolled in a cooking class, exploring new recipes and finding joy in creating delicious dishes. I also joined a running group, and exercising not only improved my health but also helped clear my mind. There were times when I felt engulfed by loneliness. The evenings after the kids went back to David felt suffocatingly quiet. Those were the moments I had to face myself and confront the pain of the past. I began learning to accept and forgive myself. Getting a divorce didn't mean failure. It was a new beginning, an opportunity for me to reclaim my own life. I also reached out to old friends I had lost touch with due to my busy family life. They welcomed me back with open arms, and I felt no longer alone. Conversations with friends helped me gain a more objective perspective on everything, and I began to feel that I was gradually recovering. Relationship with David post-divorce. Even though we were divorced, the relationship between David and me didn't completely end. We were still the parents of Sophia and Jacob, and that responsibility forced us to stay in touch. Initially, meeting was still challenging, especially with emotions that hadn't fully settled. However, gradually, we both learned to communicate calmly and respectfully. There were moments when I wondered if I could truly forgive David. Forgiving didn't mean forgetting everything, but accepting that past mistakes wouldn't haunt my present life. Over time, I realized that holding on to resentment only caused me more pain. I didn't want to be stuck in the past forever, so I chose to forgive David, not for him, but for myself. Forgiveness freed me from negative feelings and allowed me to focus on building a new future for myself and my children. The future ahead. While the future still held many uncertainties, I was ready to move forward. I knew I could face new challenges because I was now much stronger after everything I had gone through. I also understood that the path ahead wouldn't be entirely easy, but I believed in my ability to overcome whatever came my way. I learned that happiness doesn't always come from having a perfect family or a flawless marriage. Sometimes, true happiness comes from understanding and accepting oneself, from loving oneself before loving anyone else. I no longer felt bound by societal expectations or the pressure for a perfect life. Sophia and Jacob would always be my top priority, and I would continue to give them all my love and care. I wanted them to grow up in a healthy environment where they could feel peace and happiness, even if their parents weren't together. One day, I might fall in love again, but for now, I wasn't in a hurry to seek that out. I was learning to enjoy each moment in life, rediscovering joy in small things and building a future I could be proud of. Happiness wasn't something that could come instantly, but I believed I was heading in the right direction, and that was the most important thing.